Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Deuce85, joined by my partner in crime, co-host, and don't call him by the wrong name, Mike Cutri. Mike is here. How are you, man? You've been busy all week. I haven't been able to spend much time with you, but Friday night I have circled on my calendar for us to talk basketball. So how are things going?
It's going good. Well, I wouldn't miss the Friday show for the world, man. And I'm repping the West Coast Gonzaga hoodie just for you.
I love it.
And I'm very impressed with. Yeah, I'm very impressed with the way that you've been pronouncing my name for the whole week. So I'm doing this for you, man.
All right, awesome. That was one of those things where I was practicing it too. It's like I can't mess this up. Still has told me a few times how to say his name, and it's not coming for me. So I just
is tough.
I just call him Still. He's fine with that. All right, so we are going to be covering the main DraftKings slate as we normally do. It's a little different this time. The way they broke it up, kind of not a huge fan of it. They have a 3-game early slate, which starts like an hour or so earlier than we would normally see. So they could have left that off and then do the main slate, which is typically to like 1 or 2 p.m. PST, my time. And then they would run like an afternoon or late slate. But they've kind of just run a big, 7-8 game slate, which starts at 11:30 Pacific time. So kind of a late start there. And that goes on until 4 p.m. Pacific time. So 7 p.m. for you East Coasters. So we're going to cover that main slate. Unfortunately, like the Memphis game, that looks really good. Gonzaga, there's a couple of good teams on the early slate. Still talking the Discord about them. I won't have an article or anything about that. If we have time later, maybe we can mention a few plays, but it's mainly going to just be the main slate stuff with the bigger contests and whatnot. So we will go game by game. Those of you watching live, thank you very much. Make sure you hit the like button for us. That definitely helps our content be seen within the YouTube algorithm. Ask questions, comments, concerns as we go. I'll definitely answer those throughout. Or if you're watching on demand, we check back and answer comments throughout the day. So lots of stuff going on. We've had a couple of awesome slates this entire week. COVID is back, Mike, unfortunately. I mean, it never really left, but it seemed like we had a pretty good handle on it. Now there's all these variants happening, and it feels a lot like not necessarily last year. I mean, we missed games last year and whatnot, but it's starting to feel like that year that we lost the tournament, and I'm not ready to be panicked about that. A lot of people were in my DM saying, oh, we're not going to have a tournament, and I'm not ready to say that. But it's a little wild that we have like 12 to 15 teams that are now going to be missing games and cancellations, and this slate is a victim of that with North Carolina versus UCLA on the shelf. It is a little surprising, though, because Kentucky has picked up a game with North Carolina, and that was out before the slate dropped. So they very well could have put that game on the slate, but they didn't. But that's okay because we're going to have 7 games to break down and kind of, do our thing. So let's just jump in here and get going right away. First game on the slate, Notre Dame versus Indiana. I have Indiana -4, over under of 138. 128 tempo ranking, Notre Dame 259th. One thing we know about Notre Dame at this point, their front court, relatively soft. I mean, they have good players that, Nate Laszewski, and we know that he likes to be at the 3-point line, taking threes. Atkinson does the same. So bigs can definitely take advantage. So it seems like a matchup maybe that Trayce Jackson-Davis could certainly murder in. So why don't we start off with you, Mike? Tell us a little bit about where your head's at for this first game.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head there. It's the same story with Notre Dame as it's been for the last few years, is that their offense is pretty decent. Mike Brey runs great stuff, but they've just been a disaster on defense. And it's the same thing this year, especially inside, as you mentioned. And, Trayce Jackson-Davis is still, even at 8,400, still even a little bit underpriced than where he should be. He should probably be in the 9K range. So I end up playing him every single slate, and I'm probably going to look to him again on this slate to start the games off. He just has a juicy matchup against that soft Notre Dame front court. On the Notre Dame side, they have a pretty balanced team. There's some guys that are a little more involved than others. I'm going to look at Dane Goodwin at 5,500. He seems to be the most consistent of the bunch. I don't want to be too harsh on our boy Prentice Hub this year, but he's definitely taken a step back. Nobody really knows what's going on with his game, but Mike Brey has demoted him to the bench. So I think the last few games he's only played about 20, 25 minutes. And the freshman Blake Wesley, who is sitting here at 4,300, has been getting much more playing time. That guy he he doesn't see a shot he doesn't like. I'll tell you that. So that guy lets it fly. So he's definitely an option if you're looking for value. And even though Indiana's defense has looked a little better this year, they still play at a really fast tempo. Mike Woodson's kind of instilled this more like pace and space kind of offense for Indiana this year. So, expect this game to have a lot of possessions. And even though if you look at the metrics, Indiana's defense may look a little solid, I think Notre Dame could put up some decent fantasy scores on their side. The one question I do have for you, Walt, and I know you're a huge Race Thompson fan, so I want to know if you're going to be looking for him in this game, which he's definitely an option sitting there at 6,500. But because Notre Dame's defense is so soft and they don't really force a lot of turnovers defensively, are you looking at Xavier Johnson here at 5,600? Because we know he can have these really massive ceiling games, but he turns the ball over a ton, and he is a massive foul risk. But at the same time, with the risk there, I think this could be a good matchup where we can kind of sneak him in maybe at lower ownership and play him in a game like this.
Yeah, and that's a good call out, because that's when I was looking at this game, one of the first things I thought about was actually Xavier Johnson, and he's one of those guys, and I know it really has no true bearing on anything, but it's just kind of funny how it works out. But whenever he's been chalk, and this is back to Pittsburgh days, he's just kind of, S the bed for us. But when nobody's on him, then he seems to really go off. And this looks like a spot where, yeah, most people are going to be looking elsewhere. I don't know what he'll end up, projecting wise in terms of ownership. I'll have to poke around here this evening and early morning to see. But yeah, this would be a good spot for him. And assuming that he gets, 30 plus minutes, Notre Dame keeps it close. He should definitely get enough shots. We know his assist rate's pretty decent. The main thing is he going to reach and do kind of some dumb fouls? So I don't know if I'm ready to play him in my main just yet. I'm the kind of person that when I play a main lineup, I kind of jam it and everything, and then I play like alt lineups and GPPs and stuff. I know some people like to run multiple cash lineups. I don't really do that. So I don't know if he'll make the lineup that I refer to as main, but he's certainly there looking pretty decent. Yeah. And I'm just a little bit worried. And we always say you got to have a short memory in DFS, but feels like we're always taught. I use a show as like my own therapy session with my mental issues, because I just don't have a short memory with him. I'm just terrified. I wish they would have priced him like even 6K. I think I could have maybe gotten away a little more confidently. But yeah, 5-6 just seems really, really too good for a guy that, Notre Dame it's going to be playing, that up and down, they don't really pay fast, Notre Dame. But they give up a lot of easy buckets, it seems. And it seems like Xavier is going to be able to do whatever he wants and, just keep dishing it off to TJD or Race Thompson and keep on getting those easy assists. So hopefully you're looking at his assist props. Maybe I can get away with just playing all his assist props everywhere instead and make money off him there. As far as Race Thompson, yeah, man, I have not been like a big Race fan throughout his career, but something about him this year, just he got onto my radar kind of early, and I've been using him a lot. He's just really good leverage off of the TJD chalk. We know, Trace he's had some down games and really good matchups, and I'm not suggesting we fade him here. It'd be more of a play them together for me, which I know a lot of people don't agree with and won't do. People didn't do it the last time they were on the slate, or not last time, because I think they had a kind of a bad game, but like a couple games ago, I'll have to pull it up here. The Syracuse game, people were like, I wouldn't want to use both of them. Obviously went to overtime or whatever, so I got a little lucky there, but he had that 44. Now he's priced up to 6.5. He's had a couple of mid-20s games, and that could certainly happen again. But that last one, Mary Mac, was a 20-minute game for him. They blew him out. I think that he's going to definitely see over 30 minutes, and he will be able to grab a ton of rebounds, because those guys like Leshevsky and Atkinson, while they've had good rebounding games, you can typically muscle them around a lot. So I don't expect many people to be on him, and I could see pairing him with Trace, as your early. It's not really an early game, I guess, but, just getting off to the right start with those guys both getting, 4.5x or more, and kind of making the rest of the field chase you down to some of these other matchups. So I am definitely on Race Thompson here and going to have a lot of exposure. 33% combined rebounding rate. The big one is the 10.5% offensive rebounding rate. Puts him in a position to get a lot of easy buckets, bunnies, putbacks, all that good stuff. And he's doing a pretty decent job of getting to the foul line this year. He's third on the team with 28 attempts. So definitely my guy, TJD. And then I don't know about Xavier. I'll probably have exposure, but like I said, I'm just going to bet his props and make that work. And then, I got to imagine that Wesley on the other side at 4.3, which doesn't make sense for that price. So DK keeps messing with us a little bit. They'll go up and they'll do good on pricing in the game set, and then they'll kind of go back down. Wesley's taken double-digit shots in 4 of his last 5, so at 4-3, you can expect him to be, even on a 7-game slate, probably 60 to 70% owned in that high dollar stuff, cash games, all of that. So, I mean, he's putting up 25s against Kentucky, 32 against Illinois. Obviously, Indiana's defense is decent, but he's going to do just whatever he wants because he's going to shoot 10 times. So a lot of exposure here for me, probably up to 3 players in my main lineup. All right, next game, Georgia Tech versus USC. USC -8, over under of 134.5. Georgia Tech 153 in tempo, USC 220. They will not raise the price of Isaiah Mobley, and I guess it's time. We've made jokes like, I wish it was Evan on the slate, and he's kind of just, he's been letting us know what time it is lately. 5 out of his last 6, he's been over 40 DK points. And those are against, opponents that maybe not world beaters, but it's guys that he should be doing well against, right? Long Beach, EKU, Irvine. The WSU game, he was kind of a little tough for him. Utah, he put up almost 50. So he's been doing some damage. SDSU 42. So I honestly think that would be the one thing that maybe would consider me or give me consideration to potentially fade, Trace in some of these lineups that I'm building because, people aren't going to be playing him and Trace and some of these other guard plays and there's some other good forwards we're going to talk about here, but in these 7-8K range, it's kind of loaded. So I don't know that people are going to get up to him necessarily. And Georgia Tech's interior defense has been a unit that, they don't have the bodies down there that they once did. There's an opportunity for him to really put up a big game with his rebounding abilities, block shots, stuff like that. I mean, Rodney Howard has been adequate. He does have a 9.8% offensive rebounding rate, so he can get it done down there, but he's a bit of a fouler. They can get him out of there early. I just feel like Mobley's going to, kind of run the show down there. So as far as front court options, I think people are going to sleep. And you can look back at the last game, what was it? LSU, when they played LSU and LSU won 69-53, just the most recent. Darius Days and Efton Reed didn't really score a whole lot, but they were grabbing pretty much every single rebound. Days especially, I think he had 10 in that game. And there was a stretch in the glass there where they had Efton Reed especially had 3 straight offensive rebounds, and Georgia Tech was just kind of standing around watching. So I think that the rebounding opportunities for Mobley put him in play, and people are really going to overlook him. If you don't want to pay that price, but you maybe want to try to take advantage of that matchup. I was going to say Chavez Goodwin, but they did price him he's 6K now. So maybe you want to walk that back a little bit. He has been playing really well, surprisingly well. So I still think he's probably in play, but 6K is a little bit much for him. What do you think about Boogie Ellis, man? What's going on? Because this would be a game for him to maybe break out, but I'm scared to use him, and it's a good price at 6.2. But I don't know. What do you think? The system's just not fitting him, or what?
I mean, he was off to a good start for USC, but I think the price is juicy at 6.2 for him. With his usage, and he does have the ball in his hands a lot on this offense, but I don't know if the matchup is right for us to use him at that price. I mean, I think you are on the right track with sticking to bigs in this matchup because, Georgia Tech plays that morphing zone. And unless they have a lot of athletes underneath, like they had Moses Wright last year, those zones, you typically, I look at Syracuse every year, they typically struggle to rebound the ball. And that's something that I think Isaiah Mobley can really take advantage of. And, he is priced pretty high, so I'm hoping people overlook him, but I'm definitely interested in him on the USC side. And I'd rather stick to the USC front court in this game, DFS-wise, than their backup. I'm even interested a little more. I'd rather pay $200 more for Drew Peterson just because he can mix in some rebounds and some assists in there rather than just Boogie Ellis, where you really, he has a pretty high assist rate, but you really need him to get to 15, 16 regular points to hit his value.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I've been looking for a chance to use him. I haven't really used him this year. Maybe he'll price will go down in the 5s, and then he can be 70% on the next slate or something.
Yeah, that's typically what happens. All right, how are you looking at Michael Devoe here? You think you can kind of maybe use him as an alt play and sneak into a GPP? Because looking at you look at the metrics, and USC is a top 10 defense, but so people are going to be like, okay, no, I don't want anybody on Georgia Tech, but Devoe is kind of matchup proof. He can go out and score 30 on USC. They can still lose by 20, but he can still put up 30 regular points and crush his value at 8,500. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it became that way for me where I didn't worry about matchup for him just at the beginning of the month when they had that game against Wisconsin, and I missed out because I didn't play. I had a little bit of exposure, but I didn't use him on my main, and he ended up dropping. I mean, he played 40 minutes against them in a close loss. Played 30, or he scored 33, and he shot like I want to say 19, 20 times, something like that, and he had a good game, and he rebounded well too. He had like 5 or 6 rebounds. So yeah, he's matched up after that game because Wisconsin's defense, which I do respect quite a bit. Yeah, I don't think there's any real defense that can necessarily slow him. He did have kind of a down game against LSU. LSU's defense, as they play really good team defense. So he did struggle against them, but yeah, I think he could do some damage here against USC. And if you're going to get a guy like that at sub 10% ownership potentially, that makes a lot of sense, especially in the bigger jam where only the top 5 people really get money, and you want to try to take a home run shot, then he makes a lot of sense in a play there. The $100, $200 GPPs, maybe not so much, but yeah, if you're playing large field stuff, I see a lot of upside there for sure.
And I just want to mention before we go to the next game, there is some value here on the Georgia Tech side that I did discover when I was researching the slate. Especially at 3K, Khalid Moore is sitting there at 3K, and he's had over 30 minutes of playing time the last 2 games. So if you really want to get some studs in your lineup and you're looking for some value at minimum price, Khalid Moore's sitting there. He plays 30 minutes, and all he needs is 12 fantasy points to hit value. So that's definitely an option here in this game. People might glance over it because they just might see USC and move on to the next game, but Khalid Moore is an interesting value play.
Right here. He's probably like the Adam Seiko play of the day, right? So Seiko, like, low rates, doesn't shoot a lot, but playing 28, 30 minutes. Seiko today, another 32 minutes. I know he had 12 real. I don't have their stat line in front of me, but I know he had 12 real because I saw somebody talking about it. So yeah, I mean, you need somebody,
especially in cash, right?
Spot. Yeah. If he gets you like 10 points even in your cash game, you may be okay, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So yeah, they had a couple other guys that I like too. I'm probably not going to take shots at them, but I really like Dallin Coleman for the future. Davon Smith has had some nice games. He's kind of fallen off. His minutes have trailed off recently, but all guys to kind of, consider and look at for as time goes by here. All right, next game on the slate is Marquette versus Xavier. This is definitely an appealing game at first glance. It is a minus 10.5 spread for Xavier, 148.5. Marquette's 5th in tempo, Xavier top 70 right there at 69th. So there is going to be a lot to like here. Xavier, they got Fremantle back in the mix. He's a pretty juicy price. Jack Nunge is doing some damage off the bench. Dwan Odom was a guy that we had both talked about on the last Xavier slate as being a quality value. Didn't quite get him in because of some other stuff, but his minutes look good. He looks like a pretty top value play on this slate. A lot to like on the Xavier side, and there's some value on the other side. Kirkwa, Greg Elliott, maybe if he's going to get 20 plus minutes now. So there's a lot. What are you thinking here? Are you going to be stacking this game, or just certain guys you're picking out? What do you think?
Yeah, so I love targeting against Marquette this year just because of, number one, they really dictate the pace and they make you play really fast, right? And Xavier this year has been playing a little bit faster on their themselves, so I think that they are going to pace up to Marquette's tempo, and this game can just get out of control. A lot of turnovers, which means a lot of fantasy points, a lot of rebounds. I really think this could be a Paul Scruggs game, especially because he's priced down a little bit. Just because of the kind of game flow, how it's going to be the ball's going to be in his hands a lot. And just because of the high tempo game flow, it could be one of those games where we've seen him have a ceiling performance and put up triple double type numbers with a couple steals and maybe a block or two mixed in there. So I really am looking at Paul Scruggs at 7,400, especially after he's been priced down a little bit. But other than Paul Scruggs, like you kind of mentioned, the value there for Xavier for their bench guys, because they do play a couple guards off the bench about 20 minutes, and they're very involved and very active in the offense. Plus, you have Colby Jones and Nate Johnson, who one of them ends up getting in foul trouble every game. So, Kunkel and Odom end up having to play a decent amount of minutes off the bench. And they're both sitting here at 3,400 for Kunkel and 3,200 for Odom. I think the safer of the two would be Dwan Odom, just because he has better rebounding, assist, and steal rates than Kunkel. But Kunkel is the one with a higher upside just because I think he had a 26-point game earlier in the season for Xavier, and a fast-paced game against a Marquette team that's kind of chaotic where they can give up a lot of open jumpers. One of those two guys could definitely have a pretty big game. So I'm looking at Paul Scruggs for Xavier, and I'm also looking at Kunkel and Odom for value. On the Marquette side, the only one I'm really looking at is maybe Justin Lewis at 6,800, just because he's so freaking talented, and he's had a couple massive games when they actually get him the ball. But other than that, I think I'm going to kind of shy away from some Marquette exposure, just because of I'm really high on Xavier this year, and I think their defense is actually legit. If you look back last year, like they kind of really struggled. Their offense was okay, but their defense was terrible. But with Nunji and Jerome Hunter and Fremantle back in the fold, their interior defense looks, one of the better ones in the whole entire country. So, I'm a buyer of this Xavier team and this Xavier defense. So I'm probably not going to be looking to have any Marquette exposure in my lineups.
Yeah, I definitely, buying into Xavier's defense a little more now as well. I was more on the Joni Broom train the other night because Miles was banged up, because I think he's a really big part of what they've been doing. And he's kind of, they don't have anyone in the front court, Marquette, that's on kind of Broom's level. So we'll probably get questions about, Kirkwath at sub 4K and if he can make it, and it's fine as a GPP play. But yeah, I don't want to be targeting against Xavier's defense with guys who maybe aren't as talented on offense or in that kind of mold. And it's tough to be in the Broom mold. I mean, he's a hell of a player. So I agree with you. Some of these prices are nice on, these guys, Cam Jones and Kerr and Elliott and stuff, and I bet they're gonna project well in the optos when all that's updated. But it just doesn't feel like a very good spot for your main build when you play 3-2 Odom and feel good about him playing 21 minutes and kind of eking out that 15-16 fantasy point game at worst. You mentioned Kunkel. He's got the 24% shot rate, so he's the guy that he'll get more looks and be looking to score a little bit more, where Odom maybe racks up the assist and a couple of rebounds and then maybe get to the free throw line. So I'm pretty high on Odom here. I don't want to miss out on another game for him. This feels like it's going to be a slate with the value we've already seen in the first 3 games. That's going to be super high scoring. Unfortunately, I don't mind high scoring slates because I kind of like the lower scoring slates though. So I can tell already this is going to be one of those ones where you can't make too many mistakes, which is fine. But yeah, Xavier, I think Fremantle at 6'8", man, that's as long as it seems like. Before we move on, like he fouled out against Cincinnati, played 24, 3 in a row now. He's played 20. Do you feel like he's got a cap? They don't really talk about it much, or do you feel like it's just kind of like they're just kind of taking him along slowly without a hard cap, or what do you feel like there? Because he's a good play at 6'8", but if he's only going to get 20-ish minutes, maybe not as good as we think.
Yeah, I mean, he is a amazing fantasy player, just because of his usage, his rebounding rates. He even mixed in some assists in there. But yeah, like you said, it seems like they're still kind of being a little tentative with his minutes. He hasn't seen over 25 minutes yet. He got the quick hook a couple times. I was watching the Morehead State game, and Steele took him out after just like a few 3-minute, 4-minute bursts. And if, there's a lot it's a 7-game slate. There's a lot of options. Paying that much for him, I think you can get away with it in GPP, but in your main, unless you're playing from behind, because he does have a really high ceiling, it's just hard to get there because of his minutes are so unpredictable, right? And if you're going to ask me, is he going to get 30 or is he going to get 20? I'm going to lean towards more like 20 minutes, just from what I've seen in the past. But yeah, he's viable for GPP. And, I think if Marquette keeps this game really close, Steele's going to play his best players and he may get a couple more minutes here. But it's just tough. It's just really tough to get there for your main.
Yeah. And there it seems like maybe they're a little less, feeling they they have to play him closer to 30 with Nunji there. They're able to kind of bring him in slowly. So yeah, they're
and Jerome Hunter's been great too. He had an amazing game against Morehead State.
I have to walk back because the beginning of the season I said, oh, they're gonna have, when Fremantle's hurt, they're gonna have to play Hunter big minutes, and that's just not a good thing. And he's done way better than I thought he would. So I have to admit I was wrong, because I thought him playing more minutes would equate to disaster from what we saw before, but he's been improved this season. So you're definitely right about that. All right, next game, West Virginia versus UAB. This is one that I like actually quite a bit. I think it won't be popular or anything, but I like this UAB team a lot. -3.5, 135 over under. UAB's favored. 99 tempo ranking, West Virginia 299. I'm on the Jelly train. I like Jordan Jelly Walker. He's been a guy that I've used a lot in DFS over the last 2 years. When he was on Tulane last year, when they were on the slate a lot, he was just my guy. This year, he's got a 32% usage rate, a 32% shot rate, and a 32% assist rate. He's also shooting 46% from long range on 59 attempts. So making a point to improve. The last couple of years, he's been around a mid 30% shooter. So I definitely he's liking the place that he's at now. Andy Kennedy's doing a real nice job. They're off to a 9-2 start. A close loss to San Francisco, which is that Don's team is really good. And I think I want to use some Jordan Walker here. And he's kind of the early candidate for the posh play of the day at 7K. That's kind of been the spot where, guys get ignored. Typically he's not going to project totally out of control. He'll probably have like a 26, 27 projection, but he could definitely get 30 plus against this West Virginia team, because you and Stills were talking about on the Discord, and you've even mentioned, I believe, that West Virginia's defense, we're kind of accustomed to them being such a good unit, and they're top 40 efficiency, but they have, given up some points to teams, 82 to Marquette. There's been guys that have been able to put up some fantasy scores against them mainly, and they have only really played Marquette and Connecticut. The Connecticut game was kind of difficult to watch at times, but, Isaiah Whaley had 15 on them, RJ Cole 14 real. So they individual scores against them have been good. And I think that Walker could definitely do some damage. And the nice thing about Walker is he likes to steal the ball. The turnovers that West Virginia has, they tend to give up a lot of steals at times. So I think he could, steal maybe 2-3 times. And then, if he gets a couple of, 5-6 assists, buckets, he'll be, pushing 40 fantasy points. So I'm definitely trying to sell him. I really like the rotation that they're running. Right now it's Walker, Jemison, KJ Buffin, Quan Jackson, Tavin Loven, Josh LeBlanc, and Jamal Johnson. That's kind of like really and then Michael Ertle's in there too. So the rotation, when people look at it, will maybe be scared about it because they are like 8 or 9 deep. But, in close games, Walker is going to be on the court. Buffin's going to be on the court. Quan Jackson, all those guys in close games play over 30 minutes. You can look at the St. Louis game, where they all played 30. Walker in that one had 18 real, 7 assists against a tough St. Louis defense. So I'm pretty excited about him and this team. I like watching him play. So I'm certainly on board with him. Buffin is his foul rate is still extremely high at 5.9 per 40, which we're used to from when he was in the SEC. When on the floor, though, he's super strong, 13% offensive rebounding rate, block rates over 3% on steal rate, and then his combined rebounding rates pushing 30%. So in that game you saw where he had 30, if he can stay on the floor, he can definitely put up some big stat lines, and people really just ignore him. So at 5'3", I think he has a little bit of sneaky upside as well. And I just don't think people will use him. Same with kind of Josh LeBlanc at 3.4. He's going to be one of those value guys that people overlook because we already have 6 guys under 4K that we've kind of talked about. And LeBlanc could be, 22 minutes, 3-4, do some damage against West Virginia. And suddenly he's got 20 fantasy points. So there's a lot that I like on this UAB side. And I think I might have, above the field exposure on it, and I don't feel bad about it. Taz Sherman is definitely in play. 8-1 is going to be a tough price to get to, but he's at this point, he's just doing everything for him. McNeil's kind of emerged as well as his usage rates come up, but Sherman's actually 8th on the Ken Pom Player of the Year rankings. I always look at that because it kind of just shows you who's doing, a lot of damage. Shot rates 33.5%, usage rate over 30%, assist rates decent at 22, steal rate of 3, and then he's drawing 6.4 fouls per 40. He has 54 foul attempts. 64. I always harp on foul attempts when I do talk on the show and even in my write-ups, just because when these games you see him come down at the end and people always complain, well, they turn into free throw fest and it's boring. Well, for us DFS guys, my guy's at the line 8 times in the last minute. I'm racking up these points and I'm starting to pull away from others. So I do look at that in games that I suspect to be close. And Sherman's a guy that I think could potentially score like 30 real points in this particular matchup. And I would rather use him than Sean McNeil. The price is obviously almost 3K difference. But I just trust Sherman. I'm not ready to be there on McNeil just yet. I know he's been taking a lot of shots and he looks pretty good, but I'm going to wait and see on him at least one more game. It might burn me, but I'm just not ready to play him in my main lineup yet. What do you think about this one?
So this game scares the hell out of me, to be honest with you. It's going to be crazy. There's going to be both teams like to press. Both teams like to pressure on defense. Both teams love the foul. And that is the main reason why it scares the hell out of me, because we could see, 8 guys in the first half have 2 fouls each. And you're sitting here wondering why your guy only has 2 fantasy points. But if that doesn't happen, like, I love where your head's at, because there could be a ton of turnovers, a ton of steals, a ton of rebounds because of the pace, and a ton of fantasy points. Jordan Walker, I love as a player. I'm on board with you on, targeting him in a lot of my lineups. If this game is close, which is projected to be only a 3-point game, he's going to be on the floor for UAB, and he is going to have the ball in his hands. So I am definitely on board with Jordan Walker. I even like Quan Jackson a little bit, just because he has massive steal and block rates. And just because of this like chaotic game flow, like this game is definitely going to be very ugly to watch. But his type of game can rack up a lot of fantasy points. Like we talked about it in our last show when we were discussing West Virginia against Uconn, and Andre Jackson kind of had that same type of game that can really have a ceiling performance in a fast-paced, chaotic type of game. Quan Jackson has that exact same game. So at 6,600, I don't think anybody's going to play him. So I'm definitely looking at Quan Jackson GPPs. And like you said, KJ Buffin, if he can stay on the court in this game, which chances are he's not going to be able to, but 5,300 is way too cheap for the amount of fantasy points he can rack up if he's on the court in this game. And then on West Virginia side, I mean, it's the Taz Sherman and Sean McNeil show. I mean, they really don't have much offense besides those two, which makes them both appealing DFS plays. They're going to get pressured, so they're going to be forced to make plays, and they're going to with the ball in their hands. So as long as they both can stay on the court, they're both fantasy options as well. After watching the West Virginia scrimmage earlier in November, I tweeted out that Taz Sherman was going to average 20 points per game. And I got a couple people DM me like, what are you talking about? There's no way that's going to happen. Yeah. If you look at his last 5 games, he's scored over 18 points. So this guy, Taz Sherman's legit. He can really score the rock. So, there's a tough decisions to make in that 8K range, but he's definitely viable there. And then, if you're looking for a last man in, I don't mind Sean McNeil there either, because he's going to get his shots up in this game if he's not in foul trouble. And that's a big if in this game. So, always have that in the back of your mind when you're building your rosters, that there could be a lot of foul trouble in this game.
Yeah. And I remember that tweet. You definitely nailed it. And I thought that they had a chance, once you said it, I started thinking about it. I was like, yeah, he's right, because they didn't really have any other like creators or guys that are going to go, when they need a bucket, who can they look to score? They don't have McBride or any of these guys anymore. So it had to be him. And we saw him flash last year. I didn't necessarily think about it prior to you saying that. So once you did, it was like, yeah, it was a great call. So he's going to be putting up a lot of big games. The fact that he's 8th on Ken Palm's Player of the Year rankings too, like that just shows like he's getting it done efficiently as well.
Right.
So
he's good.
And you mentioned as far as like, Quan Jackson, he has a 6.4% steal rate, which is top 5 in the country. But there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys on this team, on the UAB team, actually 7, if you count LaCour, over 2.5% steal rate. So they play a frenetic type of style.
Yeah, they get after it.
Creates a lot of turnovers. So I love it, man. I love steals is one of those things that you can't really predict all that much, but when you see a team that does turn it over and guys with high steal rates, you can kind of reasonably expect it. And I do kind of like, trying to project it and attacking guys that do get steals. I mean, that's something we did with Posh last year. So
and we're playing for upside. We're playing for upside, right? And that's, that's what you chase. You chase steals and blocks, because that's where you get those massive 40, 50 point games, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially now with the way that everybody's overlapped and stuff, and just finding even one or two guys that have that upside if they hit their ceiling that can really set you apart for a big night. You've already had a couple big nights, so you know what's up with that. All right, next game, Providence versus Uconn. This is the one for me. I'm not necessarily excited about, but I don't want to completely ignore it because there's probably going to be some guys coming out of here with some decent scores. It's a 6.5 spread, 137 over under. Uconn 179 tempo, Providence 206. This is right in your realm, right in your area. You start us off with this one. Tell me about this game.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a classic Big East rock fight between these two. Providence heads to Uconn, and I think the story to kind of follow is the status of Tyrese Martin and Adama Sanogo, which it looks to me like Tyrese Martin is trending towards playing, and it looks like Sanogo is more questionable, doubtful, but definitely something to monitor tomorrow morning. That was just the last I saw tonight, so things could definitely change. But the Uconn rotation is, if both those guys out, or even Sanogo is out, it's still a shorter rotation. So even though this is probably going to be a less DFS fantasy friendly matchup than games earlier in the slate, some of these guys could put up decent scores and at low ownership. So I don't hate. RJ Cole is always an option. The ball is always in his hands. Especially without Sanogo, because Sanogo is usually the usage monster on this team. But with him out of the lineup, everything goes through Cole. And then you still have some value plays. Andre Jackson, which is a guy I love for fantasy purposes, is still 4,600. He doesn't really score the ball very well, but he can rack up peripherals better than pretty much anybody else can. So even against a slower paced Providence team, at 4,600, I don't mind going to Andre Jackson. And then if Sanogo is indeed out, Cook's going to start there in the center spot. He's going to get 25 to 30 minutes, and he could put up some decent rebounding and block stats. So that's another value play that you can get away with playing at 3,700 to fit in some studs. On the Providence side, man, they sneakily are having a really solid season, sitting here at 10-1 with a couple decent wins. They beat Wisconsin on the road. They beat Texas Tech too at home. So they have a couple decent wins. And, it's kind of been the emergence of Al Durham, right, as a ball handler for this team. And then AJ Reeves has been, he's always been kind of up and down, but he's been pretty decent recently. But, from a fantasy perspective, they are a very balanced team. Cooley runs this really boring flex style offense that it's sometimes hard to watch. They try to get the ball inside to Nate Watson as much as they can. Uconn, defense is very, very good, especially when they're fully healthy. I think they're going to be a top 10 defense. So Providence is probably a team that I'm going to probably stay away from and targeting players. But, Noah Horchler is definitely an option at 7,200. I know no one wants to play him at that price, but you could get like a 2% ownership at 7,200, and he could put up a 16-12 game quietly. So I don't mind him. And then if you're looking for guys with high ceilings, AJ Reeves has been on fire recently, and he's only 6,900. So I wouldn't really play him in your main or your cash lineups. But if you're looking for a one bullet GPP, AJ Reeves is there definitely as an option. But overall, probably not the sexiest game to target. But, a lot of these Big East rock fights aren't for DFS purposes. But, especially on the Uconn side, there are some interesting pieces.
Yeah, and I feel like we kind of fall into this trap, and this happens in other sports too, where it's like with Virginia, especially, well, it's a slow paced game. They got a good defense. There's not going to be any fantasy goodness, but these teams play those types of games every single time they take the court. And Uconn it feels like that's going to be one of their trademarks this year. Is they're going to, play good defense, and they've got guys who are going to, make you work for every shot. And they're just used to that style of play. So yeah, there's going to be guys that come out of here, making value. So we don't want to overlook them necessarily. And I'm guilty of that as well, especially Virginia over the last couple of years. Sometimes I'll ignore them, and they'll end up having two or three guys, that make it, not so much this season, but in seasons past when Jay Huff was on there and stuff. A Cook at 3.7. Yeah. If that's, depending on that Sanogo news, that's going to be your guy that is just ridiculously high owned, not even fun. Like it won't even matter what his score is if Sanogo's out. So I kind of like for that reason alone, hope Sanogo plays because we don't need a Cook's value if Sanogo does. Like it'd be different if it was like there's no other value on the slate, but we're almost up to 10 sub 4K guys now, and we're got a couple games left on the slate. So I kind of hope that just for spreading out the ownership. And I still like the Jackson call that you're making. Sounds like Martin looks like everyone's saying he's going to play. Usage wise, maybe that affects a little bit, but yeah, he does enough that he can still pay off that 4-6 tag. And I probably would not be on anyone from Providence. You'd mentioned Reeves. He has been on fire. He's just that guy that is the second that I buy in on him, he's going to hit me with one of those classic 12 fantasy point games.
That's so 2 for 14 from 3.
Yeah. So I'll just wait for him to get like DePaul or something, and that's when I'll go ahead and take a shot on our guy Reeves. So, all right, next game. There's 2 left. Houston versus Oklahoma State. 9.5 spread for Houston, 135, 294 tempo ranking. Oklahoma State 89th. Oklahoma State is going to be without. It's not like they've been using him a lot lately. Most C say he's got some sick family members, so he's going out of the country to take care of that. So that thrusts, Caleb Boone back into a bigger role potentially. He's 5'8", it's a decent price. Moncrief maybe. Like I don't even think I can sell these guys. The prices on them are really nice, but I am kind of taking a hard stance about targeting against Houston guys.
Yeah, I wish it was a different matchup that we can use these guys, but it's just it's not Houston. It's literally like the worst team they can go against. Exactly.
Yeah. So if it was like a smaller slate, like I'll go against Houston because I have no choice. But we're dealing with a 6, 7, 8 game slate. It's just it feels like not the move. Now Houston is dealing with some injuries of their own. Right. Tremont Mark was out recently. Sasser was out, or might not be injuries. I don't know if was it sickness or turf toe. Okay, so turf toe for Sasser.
Yeah.
And then Reggie Chaney was missing time. He had a hand injury, although it sounds like he's expected to play. So there's different things going on here. If Sasser's out again with Mark and stuff, Taze Moore at 4.9 is pretty interesting. We saw him get thrust into a much larger role. Minutes for he'd been playing like 11, 12 minutes. There's just no room for him. He was able to play 36 last game, put up almost 40 fantasy points, 14, 10, and 4. He has that kind of ability. People probably don't realize because, before this year, a lot of people, unless they're diehards, really know, who he was or where he came from. He played for Cal State Bakersfield, and he's a guy that, 30% usage rate, shot rate, he did everything for them. So he has that ability. It's just a matter of getting those minutes. So if all those guys are out again, even against Oklahoma State defense that's been pretty decent in their own right, I would be really interested in him at 4.9. And I think people would probably overlook him just because it's a later game. I mean, I know he just had a good game, so technically game logs chasers like to look at that and still play it, but you're also dealing with the last game on the slate or one of them, and people will be out of moves, so they may not want to wait for that news if it doesn't come. So he could be low owned. Jamal Sheed, his price has come up to 5.8, so I am glad they did that. He's been really good regardless. Even when they're at full strength, he has scored 20-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. He had some decent games last year. He didn't get to play much because of how deep they were, but he is emerging like really big time. They're going to have him on the floor. His shot rates and usage rate are both under 20%, but his peripheral stats are really strong. Almost 4.5% steal rate, 31% assist rate. He does shoot 38% from long range when he does shoot. He has 21 attempts, does a decent job getting himself to the line. He's just a very strong player. He's only a sophomore, still a lot of time to go. When Sasser goes to the pros or whatever he does, Sheed's going to become a big time, like 8K guy that we're always talking about. Really like him a lot. I did think what he's doing now is what I thought Cam Tyson was going to do last year before he decided to move on to Seattle U. Out in my hometown. But he's really good. So I don't mind using him at 5.8, especially if all these injuries are still going on. And depending how that news breaks, if we get that news prior to this, still have the LSU game at the same time. So if you do, wait for that news and it comes and you decide you don't want to play Sheet or you've got to make some additional moves, you have another game to do so. And LSU, maybe not, necessarily like there's good plays in this LSU team, but that would be a team that I'd be fine pivoting more exposure to, I guess is what I'm getting at, because their rotation's small and they're always involved in good, like fantasy type games. Fabian White's there at 5.7. He's coming off a good game. Carlton, as I hate to admit it, has been playing well. So there's a lot of interesting pieces here for this game, but it doesn't appear to be another one of the good, fantasy targets, but prices on both sides are really good. So what would be your approach for this one?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have such a bad taste from this Houston team fantasy wise, just because when that news broke last slate that all these guys are going to be out, I had the option to pivot off of Mark Williams to get to Fabian White and Taze Moore. And I decided not to because I really like Mark Williams in that slate. And he ended up dudding, and those guys ended up going off, and it cost me like so much money. So I really have a bad taste in my mouth from this Houston team. But again, we have a situation where it's one of the later games on the slate and you're waiting on injury news, and it's just not fun for anybody. But from what it's looking like Sasser's going to play, and it's looking like Chaney's going to play, and Mark is still questionable. I think he maybe re-aggravated his shoulder that kept him out in the beginning of the year, so he's looking more questionable than the other two. But probably on the Oklahoma State side, I mean, they play fast. You do have Cisse out, but Houston's defense is elite, especially interior on the inside. We kind of alluded to it before. So, even you may be inclined to be, maybe Moncrief or Caleb Boone are going to get extra run, which they probably are. They aren't going to dominate the glass in this type of matchup against Houston, who's just absolutely absurd inside, especially defensively. But if you do want Oklahoma State exposure, which is going to be low ownership, Avery Anderson has been the dude for them, especially recently. I know their rotation was a little wacky to start the year, but he's been getting consistent 35 minutes the last couple of games, and the ball's always in his hand. And we saw, especially towards the end of last year, when Cunningham was out, he really took over the offense. So, I don't mind a sneaky play here with Avery Anderson because somebody's going to have to do something on the Oklahoma State side. On the Houston side, if everybody is back, minus Mark, I'm probably not looking too much to use any of the Houston guys. If Chaney is out, then I'm definitely interested in Fabian White at 5,700. If he plays, because he usually only plays maybe 25 minutes, but last game he played 35 minutes and he put up like close to 40 fantasy points. So if he's going to get and play the whole game, he's a fantasy point per minute monster. So that's definitely interesting, but you have to wait for the Chaney news. And if Sasser does play, he may be an interesting kind of pivot off of some of these, higher owned guys like a TJD or maybe a Mobley or whoever's you're going to play at, or Devoe at that 8K range. I don't think a lot of people are going to play Sasser, especially in the late game, because he does have that questionable tag when you're building your lineup. He gets, he can get 20, 25 shots up, and especially in a faster paced game like this, if he's a full go and he's going to play 35 minutes and hopefully Oklahoma State can keep it pretty close, Sasser can put up one of his ceiling performances and put 45 fantasy points up. So I wouldn't be opposed to running Sasser out, especially maybe if you wanted to kind of have a late game option, have Sasser in there. Maybe, if he's out or something happens, you can pivot to maybe Days or Eason on LSU. But, Sasser is definitely an option for me here.
Yeah, no, I like that call. And he doesn't, unless it's a smaller slate, he doesn't really get a whole lot of ownership. And yeah, he does kind of quietly pop those, 40, 35 fantasy point games, and nobody really talks about it because no one plays him. And he's been doing it a lot more recently. So, yeah, I like that call. That's interesting. Because I feel like Houston ownership could be like a GPP winner, or just set you aside and put you in a good spot. But with some of this news trending, it's going to be tough to really kind of hone in on that and figure it out. But yeah, I definitely like that Sasser call. All right. Louisiana Tech versus LSU brings up the final game on the slate. I have a 9.5 point spread for LSU, 145 over under, 66 tempo, Louisiana Tech 120th. Now, you have a couple of situations here for Louisiana Tech. They did lose Isaiah Crawford for the season. That's a bummer. He's a really solid player for them. And then last game in a Shreveport, I guess they were playing, Lofton didn't play. So I don't know if that was just like they didn't need him and that he wanted to just save him or what, but we'll have to make sure that he's actually starting. It's a last game as well. I don't necessarily think he is like the must play that he has been on other times that he's on the slate. 7.5 is a really good price for him because we know he can put up 50 plus. LSU's defense, while they're good, they play a type of style that a lot of rebounds are in, steals, points, everything. So I think he's a really nice GPP play if he plays, but if you don't want to wait for all this news in these last 2 games and you know, maybe you're not around, then yeah, you may have to just kind of, you know, bail off him. I do want to have LSU exposure here. My guy, Darius Days, Days was a guy that I was using last year. I mean, with Cam Thomas, of course, but when everybody was using, you know, other players on that team, Days was always the guy that got forgotten about. And he started off the season really just on fire, going to take over as the alpha. And he's kind of trailed off recently. He's always kind of a guy that the way he plays, you wouldn't think he gets into foul trouble, but unfortunately it does happen. But the mediocre games he's been playing lately has kind of brought his price down to that low 7K range, which I'm really interested in at 7.3. So there's another guy in that mid 7, you know, range that's a strong play. And if you want to go full balanced, you can definitely do so. He does have a 28% shot rate. His defensive rebounding rate is really strong, almost 24%. Shooting about 37% from long range. He does take a bunch of threes. He can bang down low. He's only 6'7", but he's kind of like multifaceted in that regard, that he doesn't back down from people on defense, and he can bring his guy out and hit threes in their face if he has to. So Days is really an unsung hero. He doesn't get a lot of hype and people just overlook him. So I definitely really like him, you know, at that price of 7.3, less so at 8K. So I'm interested there. Terry Eason is just and it's tough because we can never really consider him for your main lineup because he doesn't start and the minutes aren't there. But as far as talk about fantasy point per minute monsters, there's really hardly anyone better than him, because in 20 minutes he can put up 30 plus fantasy points, and he's done so. He's been averaging right around 25 minutes. You see against Georgia Tech, 27, he had 40 fantasy points. Against Ohio in 25 minutes he had 40. Against FSU, 36. I mean, he's just putting up a lot, and his rates are huge, and his recent string of games has put him in the Ken Pom Player of the Year rankings. He's 6th right now, and he doesn't even start. He has a 30% shot rate, 30% usage rate. He shoots threes, but he doesn't make very many, but he has to be respected. He has an 8.5% block rate, 4.5% steal rate. He's drawing almost 6 fouls per 40, and he has a combined rebounding rate of almost 35%. So you're looking at a guy that can fill it up in every single category. He doesn't have to score. The fact that he scored 18 plus real points in 4 of his last 5 is a huge bonus. So the minutes are tough, but I guess I don't even really need to worry about that. If there was ever a day that he played 35 minutes, like say LSU was severely depleted, I think he would be able to put up 70 if he had 35 minutes. Like I honestly feel like that could happen. So I really like him. It's just tough to really play him. I think, you know, it's safer as Darius Days. That's probably your cash play if you're going to go somewhere, but Eason at sub 15% ownership is just, Jesus, he has slate melting upside every time. I was very upset that the Huskies missed out on him the first time and he went to Cincy. And I thought for sure they were going to get him when he left, and then LSU kind of kiped in there and got him. And we probably know why, but that's okay. Eric James at 3.6 is a pretty strong value play. Another guy at sub 4K. He's really consistent. You know, he's not going to be a guy that pops, 30, 40 fantasy points, but 15 to 18 seems pretty, a good projection for him, consistently. So he's another guy that comes off the bench. So don't be worried if you don't see him starting or anything, but his minutes are, upper tier, mid 20s to late 20s. And as I said, he's been putting up right around 19 to 20 fantasy points pretty consistently. So I do like him quite a bit. If a Cook, say Sonogo plays and you have him in utility or whatever, swapping over to Gaines, if you don't start with him, would be an ideal swap for value. I would probably leaning towards starting with Gaines because I do like this game quite a bit, and he's just been such a consistent source of fantasy points. Efton Reed, the freshman big, he can shoot threes. I really like him as well as a GPP guy at 6'2". He's starting to figure it out. He's still really raw. I have him in a couple of dynasty leagues, so he's a guy I pay attention to a little bit more than I do some others. I hope he stays, because if he does, he's going to be a big time player next year. But like I said, he's starting to figure things out. He's got a pretty decent rebounding rate. 11.5% offensive rebounding rate, 9% block rate, just a really quick moving big man that can play multi-position. So I really like this starting 5/7/8 rotation. that LSU has right now. It's a perfect team for Will Wade. They're playing defense, and it's one of the better teams he's had. And think of all the talent he's had come through there. Obviously our guy Cam Thomas, who I love, one of my favorite players all time. I got to say, he's up there with Bryce Cotton, not quite to Cotton's level, but just the one season he made that much of an impact on me. Trendon Watford. They just had some really talented guys here. Nas Reed. So the fact that this team is looks like maybe possibly one of his best ones just speaks to how well that he's put this conglomerate of players together. What do you think, man? This is a good hammer game for sure. Are you on board with Days and Gaines, or are you looking somewhere else?
It's funny what playing good defense does for your team, huh? You
right?
go from a borderline, 8-9 seed where they can, press to be a top SEC or maybe a SEC championship caliber team. So that Will Wade has them playing really well, and they look legit, especially defensively. I think they're second defensively in the KenPom ranking. So it's super impressive what he's been able to do with this team. The way I think I'm going to approach this game is, I love Kenneth Lofton, and even at 7,500, I think he's underpriced. I think he should be like a 9K player. I watched him over the summer in the U19 USA team, and he was clearly their best player. And, they had Mike Miles on the team. They had Ivy on the team, but, they were looking to get the ball to Kenneth Lofton, and he's a low down. He's a great offensive big. And even against a pretty stout LSU defense, I still think he's going to get his, and 7,500 is too cheap. So I think I'm going to try to plug him into my lineup. And if news comes out late that he's not going to play just because he missed last game, and I scoured the internet and I couldn't find anything as to why he couldn't play. So if he ends up not playing this game, then I think that's a great spot for me to pivot to either Days or Eason, because number one, La Tech is down their center, and number two, they're pretty soft defensively inside anyway. So, if you're going to attack this Louisiana Tech team DFS wise, you probably want to attack them underneath. And you talked enough about how good Days and Eason have been. The only scary thing about them is that their minutes aren't too consistent. You may get 25 minutes out of them, which is a little scary. But if either of them play 30 minutes, they're going to crush their value in this matchup. And, LSU's projected to score 77 points. I think a lot of it's going to come underneath offensive rebounds. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it. And I definitely am. There's another, like you mentioned, I'm on board with another value play here. 3,600. Eric Gaines comes off the bench, going to pressure the ball. He can fill up the stat sheet in all different categories. He can score. He can grab a couple steals. He's been over 20 fantasy points in a bunch of games already this year. So 3,600 is just too cheap. I don't care if he comes off the bench or starts. He's still going to get 25 minutes in this rotation. So I'm definitely looking for Gaines as one of my value plays options. And even on the Louisiana Tech side, especially if Lofton is out, Archibald at 5,300 isn't a bad option, and neither is Kobe Williams at 41. Actually, Kobe Williams has been,
I like Kobe Williams. Yep.
Yeah, he's been the last two games he's been has their highest usage rate. So 4,100 is kind of a steal for him. I know it's a tough matchup. He's going to get pressured all game by those that perimeter of LSU. But it's such a cheap price tag that it's something to at least consider.
Yeah, definitely. He's popped a couple times throughout the last year or two. He's a sophomore last year, had a couple games where he kind of showed out. So I definitely like him. I'll have to take more of the offensive load. Yeah, if Lofton can't go.
Right.
But yeah, this is a game I always end up, I find myself stacking LSU games a lot the last few years, and it's really nice when it works out. But sometimes, yeah, like you mentioned with Days and some of the other guys playing mid-20s minutes or getting those 2 first half fouls, which does suck because Wade does pull his guys when that happens. Especially on Days, it's just super frustrating because that's a sunk cost for you at that point. So there's enough games for I don't have to full stack it, but I'm definitely enamored with this one, which I usually am with LSU. So news is going to be key. I say it every single time. Discord. Just the other yesterday, with the Stetson news with Rob Perry. He didn't start. There was nothing out there about, why or if he was going to come off the bench. It wasn't even us. that broke it. It was one of my longtime subs, Luke Glockenberg. He reached out to one of their radio guys, and he was able to find out that he was suspended and not playing. So we got that. We tagged the group and got it out there. So we have a really awesome community. That
shout out to Luke on that one.
Yeah,
saved a lot of people
for sure. Because there was people, and it's a good policy to get into anyways. When a normal starter of his caliber, Perry's high usage guy, doesn't start and there's not a lot of news about it, it's usually a good policy to not use him anyways, because it could be like a first half suspension and you've only got one half with him. There's usually not a good reason why a normal starter that scores all their points isn't starting. So probably there's still people looking for a reason to use them, but of course, once we got that news, it officially took them off the board. So definitely thank our community and Luke especially for that one. Our Discord is amazing. We really pride ourselves on news and even on with COVID popping up and all these variants and game cancellations, and we just had one with UCLA. Checking in, even if you can't be in the Discord all day every day, just get in the habit of trying to check in before certain game locks that you have players in. It doesn't have to be every game, but you have a player in the 2:00 game, check in and just make sure, hey, anything crazy. I try to post starters from the stat broadcast feeds, sidearm stats, all that in the chat when I can. I usually can't in the second part of the slate because I have to drive home from work and I'm not kind of busy, but the first part I'm on there with the starters and you guys help out. So let's move on here. We got prize picks and then a core. Do you have a 2-3 man core fired ready, or do you need a minute?
No, I'm ready. So
Okay,
I mentioned before that I love targeting against Marquette. So I do like Paul Scruggs a lot. So he's going to be my number one. And then I kind of just mentioned, I think Kenny Lofton is a little underpriced. We have to wait obviously for the news if he's actually going to play or not. But I definitely am going to slot him in a lot of my lineups. And then if I get the unfortunate news later on, I have the option to pivot on any of the LSU guys. So Scruggs I'm going to target a lot. Lofton I'm definitely going to target a lot with the option to pivot to LSU guys. And then for value, I'm going to stick with Xavier and go with Dwan Odom here. I think I just love that pace of play and how many turnovers and peripherals can come with the chaotic nature that Marquette brings. So 3,200 is way too cheap for, even if he's only getting 20 minutes, he can easily put up over 20 fantasy points, and that's smashing value at 3,200.
Yeah, I'm definitely big on him too. I will my core, I'll do like a posh play edition, because I think obvious core and stuff in cash games, we're going to tell you, Blake Wesley and TJD, guys like that. Okay, that's obvious. So yeah. I'll give you the kind of the posh version, which is kind of lower owned guys that I'll be high on. Jordan Walker, so the Jelly Fam from the Jelly Fam himself. Terry Eason, who I the more I look at it, because I think it looks like Darius Days is going to have more ownership than I first suspected. So Terry Eason as a guy to just direct pivot, especially if they play the same amount of minutes. And then for value, I think it's Eric Gaines for me. Odom and Gaines, that pairing just feels extremely strong. You're spending less than 7-8K, and two guys that could easily pop 20 each, combine 40 out of that salary. Just know it's going to be a super high scoring slate. You could get 40 out of those two and then watch, Wesley and maybe Jamal Sheed put up 60 together and then be like, oh shoot. So this is going to be a crazy high scoring slate. So just keep that in mind when you're building. You may want to build maybe a little riskier than you normally do, because you're going to need that upside, because 220 is not going to get it done on this one. It doesn't appear. I think the cash line is probably going to be somewhere between 225, 230 at minimum. So, those big days like that. Prize picks. Let me just pull a couple here. I don't know. It's unfortunately you can't play so, but you just the article you wrote the other day though, you nailed it. Today's we hit all but one. Yesterday we hit all of them, so we've been running well on prize picks. So I don't know if you have any at the ready, and that's okay if you don't. Let me just pull up a couple.
Such a shame I can't play prize picks over here in New Jersey.
It's
such a shame.
Yeah, especially they seem to have been a little softer than they were last year on CBB. College football especially, man. There was just so many soft lines this year in college football that we were crushing. And typically they are strong at basketball, especially their NBA stuff. But yeah, they've had some really soft lines. So So the first one that I look at and that I definitely like, I would say, where did it go? It just got away from me here.
I see Terrence Shannon only at 20.9. That should be an automatic over.
Yeah.
Just quickly looking at it.
Because his rates, yeah. So and then that and then Race Thompson might seem a little high at the 28.1, but PrizePicks gives 3 points for blocks and 3 points for steals, so he can get that a little quicker than he might on a site like DraftKings or FanDuel. Turnovers are worth -1, so keep that in mind. But if Race is, his rebounding prop is 8, so if he gets anywhere close to what they project him there, 10 points, 10-12 real, and then a couple blocks and steals, he's gonna get 30 plus on Notre Dame. So I'm on board with that one. I like the Dre Davis 17.9 fantasy points. He's been playing big minutes. They're playing Western Kentucky. WKU has had a decent defense, but I think he's playing enough minutes that he can hit that. And then I've been ramming through the Mark Williams rebound prop the last 2 slates. It's only 5.5. It's really low for him. He hasn't been hitting it, but damn it, he's playing Elon, and I don't want to stop playing that one, and I'm too invested. So I gotta stick with Mark Williams over 5.5 rebounds, because he should be able to do that if he starts playing more aggressive than he looked last game. Were there any others that you saw sticking out?
Yeah, the Mark Williams is tough just because, you never know how many minutes K is going to play in.
Yeah.
He decides to play in 35 minutes sometimes, and he decides to play in 15 minutes, like regardless of foul trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that Theo John's back, it's just, and I think I just have a bad taste in my mouth just because every time I use him fantasy, he ends up busting. And then every time I don't, he ends up going 45 or so. Everybody has those types of guys. I think Mark Williams is starting to become one of those for me. So let's see. I'm just glancing through PrizePicks now. So I like Terrence Shannon over 20.9. He's literally the only kind of playmaking ability that team has on offense. So they're going to need scoring to keep up with Gonzaga, tomorrow. So I like his over. Plus he can rebound the ball pretty well. I see Chet Holmgren at 36.8, which seems too high. I would, especially how physical Texas Tech is underneath and how stout their interior defense is. I think he might get pushed around a little bit. That's a lot of fantasy points to put up for Holmgren. It's 36.8. I would probably lean the under there. Let's see. Anything else? Let's see. Mike Miles.
So while you're looking, they did add that. So the Kentucky North Carolina game that did get added, didn't make the DFS slate. Their single points, I would have been personally, I would have been pretty high on Ty Washington. I feel like that would have been a game for him. 12.5 real points. I like the over there. I think he'll do some serious scoring. People in the Discord were joking about how Baycott and Oscar would have just fouled each other out, and that may have been true. And it may be true. It's not on the slate, but Ty is a guy that just feel like he's going to score some buckets against UNC. So I like his over 12.5 real.
Yeah, and his fantasy points is only 23.4. I think that's a good.
Oh yeah, that's good.
That's a good spot to hit the over there too. Even Wheeler at 22.4. I mean, that's going to be they're going to get a pace boost there from USC. So I see that game kind of being up and down a little bit. So Wheeler at over 22.4 is a good one to hit too.
Yeah,
there's some options here.
I was going to say potentially like at a flex play. So instead of doing the power play, if you do flex like on 4, you can miss one and still get paid out. So maybe if you flex Keon Brooks, because his is only 19.2. And if you do think Oscar and Armando are going to neutralize each other, it makes sense for Brooks to maybe, pile on some additional rebounds, additional playing time. So 19.2 may be on the low side for him. His minutes have been kind of rough lately, but that seems low.
Yeah, when he gets to minutes, he can put up some pretty decent fantasy points.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we got some good options.
Cool. Yep, for sure. All right, so that wraps up the show. I will have an article for that main slate will be out in the morning, and Mike's probably going to have his exposures out earlier than that or tonight. There'll be PrizePicks trackers, so I'll have the official kind of like article plays. I usually do like 3 to 5 of article plays, which are the ones I really am confident in. And then we'll see how the slates break out. Stills has been sick, so he hasn't been able to do any of those shows with me this week. But we got Mike committed for Fridays for sure. So next time we see his face might not be till Friday, but at least we have that. So I appreciate you jumping on with me when you have time, man. It's busy too, the holidays and everything. So we'll have to see, as things ramp up and we get to February and stuff, maybe we can start doing some additional content together or whatever, and give the people what they want.
Of course. Yeah, and I just want to mention that I do have my favorite bets article coming out probably early tomorrow morning of my 2 favorite bets for the earlier games tomorrow over on FTN Bets. But of course, it's going to be free, so don't worry about it. If you're not a subscriber over at FTN Bets, I'll tweet it out. But it'll just be me breaking down my 2 favorite bets for tomorrow's earlier slate. So look out for that. But yeah, Walt, obviously love talking hoops with you. Can do this forever. And hopefully we have some good fortune tomorrow, and let's make some money, dude.
Hell yeah. Let's avoid that foul trouble in them landmines.
That's right.
I'm kind of wacky this week. So I appreciate it. Thanks everybody who watched us on demand and live. Make sure you're in the Discord tomorrow for all that news. That's all I can say. Thanks guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.